So let's say hello to our panel. Mahima Potter is Senior Vice President of Personal Banking at Equitable Bank. Marc is co-founder and CEO at Zoom Rails, an open banking payment platform, a gateway rather. And finally, David Hooper is Vice President of Open Banking and Payments Consulting with CGI. Welcome to you all.
Thank you, Derek.
Let's begin the discussion with the State of the Union on open finance in Canada today. To date, there seems to be a lot of focus on technology requirements for open banking, APIs, for example, and the exchange of data. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of focus on providing value to the consumer. David, I'd like to begin with you. Is read-only a symptom of a bigger problem, or is it something we can solve in the near term? Is there too much focus on technology and not enough attention to the reason anyone would give permission to share data, a service they need or want?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to unpack there. I think one of our issues is that we've accepted that read is enough because we're too focused on the technology and sort of the data aggregation, collection, and PFM side of the world. If we'd looked at other countries that have adopted open banking and looked at the services that have truly added value to customers, and I say customers, consumers and businesses, we'd have seen that data mobility or payment initiation are, that's probably where the most value gets added. So you've got to move beyond the technology. And as you said, we've got to look at those services, what adds value, and you'll realize that we need that, I hate it, but that right capability, right? That's what will really get us to the thing that the consumers need and want and businesses need.
Mahima, your perspective.
I mean, I think there's far too much focus, maybe not on the technology, but on the security aspect of this, which is why there has been this notion of read-only access. I think the rhetoric is a bit misguided, but I can understand where it's coming from. Quite honestly, there's a huge amount of tech investment and foundation build required by the large incumbent banks to get us to open banking. And there isn't much to gain from their perspective because they already have such leading market share. So I think part of this is to kind of pace out the advancement, if you will, to make it more digestible to the big banks. But definitely agree with David, the benefit, there is benefit in read-only access and it gets us part of the way there, but payment initiation and data mobility are critical aspects of the equation. From a use case perspective, I think there's a ton of fintechs and banks out there that are working on the use case aspect of this to make it compelling for consumers and also to try and figure out the business model around this, right? Obviously we want open banking to succeed, but it has to have some business benefits as well. So I'd say the focus needs to be split in terms of finding those use cases that are going to be compelling, but you're not going to get there without the technology and the API frameworks in place. So it needs to be a balanced approach. But yeah, I definitely think there's way too much focus on the security or the risks of security as it relates to open banking.
Yeah, and we're going to get to government and regulatory framework a little later in our conversation. Marc, I'd like to get your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think what we have is a gap between the ideology of open banking and the use cases of open banking. And I think we've gone beyond the point of reconciling the both. We now have companies who just say, we're going to do it ourselves. And we have another side stalling. And then we have the ongoing conversation of what is open banking. And nomenclature aside, which I think has been the biggest holdback, we found ourselves in a precarious position where someone's already blinked, and that's the tech companies. And because there are people and there's industries now who demand it to gain market share. So we're in a precarious place where I don't know how we can resolve this gap unless someone makes a big jump either on the federal side or the banks agree to sort of partake in a secure framework.
Yeah, I'd like to actually pick up on that and follow up on that. That's an interesting point. So it appears that there is a large gap here. Government does need to take the lead right now. Marc, what would you say government really needs to do at this point right now, what they must do?
I think the big thing about open banking is no one really clearly explains the use cases. there's really good use cases for time management and efficiency in the marketplace. Outside of like my industry of payments, everyone should be able to connect their bank account to a Xero, a QuickBooks, and have it automatically digest your banking information. That is the most uh, straightforward use case, but it's very rarely talked about with open banking. Then on the flip side of payments, $10 million of fraud in the first day in the UK happened when they had instant payments. You look at Brazil, they rolled out instant payments and open banking at the same time. And as far as we can tell, that's a success. And they're essentially 10 times our population with an underbanked, severely underbanked, heavily mobile, less infrastructure, and they did it perfectly. So I think we have to start looking at what can we do in other places. Like it's clear use cases. Not so much the grand vision of what it is, but give us a clear example and let's talk about that one thing right now.
Interesting point, and we're going to dig a little deeper on that a little later as well. David, I'd like to circle back to you and ask you the question, how do we create value with open banking, or specifically, what actually creates value?
Yeah. Well, I'd say the start point is really understanding your customers and those segments that are looking for more from us. So we often hear about it from in the news and the media about consumers, but if you're out there really watching, small businesses are desperately crying for assistance. Help me run my business, manage my business. Help me reconcile. I mean, that's a huge element is reconciliation of payments in and out. So what can we do? I mean, every bank and credit union, even insurance companies offer some form of PFM, much like Marc described. We can pull in your transactions, but it gets to a sort of, well, that's great. You've given me a fancy graph to tell me I've spent too much money on coffee this month. Well, so what? What's next? And it's what's that next step? What can I do? Well, if I can tell you, look, you're going to have a cash flow crunch next week because every month you have in this week X taking place. Can we help you,
Right.
take out the lumpiness of your cash flows? Can we help you? Can we float you additional funds to get through something? Can we help you get your money faster so that, we can alleviate some of the cash flow crunches? So the things like real-time payments play into it. But it's really finding that how do we help you manage your financial life, be it personally or as a business, manage it better, be more efficient, be more effective, move things faster, and have, if you're lucky, spend less time on your business to do that. And that's what's value. I mean, we look at a lot of consumer value. It'd be great for consumer, but it's probably not something they're willing to pay for. Whereas with businesses, if you can add value and make my life better and my business better, I will pay for that service. And that's where you're truly hitting the value marker when they're ready to go, I want that, I need that. What's it going to take for me to get it? Those are the things you're looking for.
That's a good point. And Mahima, over to EQ, I think you could pick up probably on some of what David is saying right now too, and probably echo those statements.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the reality is that consumers, are not that invested in their finances, or they're not investing that much time in their finances. It's probably not the most glamorous topic that people want to spend their weekends researching. And so often people are stuck in the wrong credit card, they're stuck in the wrong bank account, they're stuck in the wrong mortgage. And there's obviously inertia around change, but there's a lot of lack of financial literacy, and it's hard to be that financially literate. So I think open banking can really provide the tips, the financial education, and then ideally actually help execute on that change. And we've seen it happen in the UK. There's one example of a mortgage fintech that is helping first-time homeowners get on the path to getting their mortgage. So it gives them tips on what changes they should make, or how to improve their credit score, whatever it might be, to actually be able to get a mortgage for that home first time purchase, which is obviously a challenge that a ton of Canadians are faced with as well. And so having access to that insight based on your personal situation, I think, can be really powerful for customers. And then absolutely, in terms of what David said, is like small businesses have so much to gain here. We know that they're underserved in Canada, and the kind of unlock that data can bring, because you're not just one of many anymore in a small business. It'll be a more catered solution and recommendation for that small business in particular.
Interesting point. And Marc, to that point too, I'd like to come to you now. financial literacy and driving demand for open banking in Canada as well. Do we feel that more needs to be done from an educational perspective, from an awareness perspective, to help drive more demand, to help open banking take a better ascending flight, so to speak, to lift off?
No.
Fair enough.
I think it's pretty straightforward from how I see it. You have big banks who have about a lot of divisions, and then you have people who think, oh, I can do that better. That's why we had, Canada Drives. That's why we had the Borrowells of the world. They took that risk. And as entrepreneurs, my hat's off to anyone who looks at something bigger than they are and says, I can do better. And they used resources that aren't available, that are available today to do that. And I think it comes down to like, hey, if I can offer a better services and I can make it less risky because I'm playing with my own capital or someone else's capital, hats off to you. And that's the stage we're at right now, is that we have challengers. That's why they call it a challenger bank out there, who are trying to use the tools available. And a lot of that is data driven from companies like Flings, Plaid, Inverite, Yodely, if you want to go further back, maybe Zoom Rails, to compete. And I think, we can talk about velocity of income and velocity of money, that, I can get you quicker loans, or, you can close on a house quicker because you're not waiting for that file exchange time. There's 1,000,001 use cases. But I think it's going to come down to the companies starting out there who say, hey, they look at that big building on Bay Street and say, I can do something better than you.
Interesting. So that value proposition is important. David, you spoke earlier too, about, stopping halfway at read and really getting into the right part of it. With open banking, real value, we know, is created for consumers and businesses when we do more than just aggregate and analyze data, correct? I mean, we can all agree on that. Real value comes from the ability to provide insights that the customer can act upon. So how are fintechs empowering the consumer and driving value today? David.
Oh, is that me? Sorry. I want to touch on a point that was made. The three of us just touched on there. Sure. I think in the end, consumers don't care about open banking. They read about it and it confuses them. Oh, the doors are going to come open and people are going to come and get my data. It's not that. It's about those services. Everything that Marc said, where can I do something better than what's available today? Or as Mahima said, like what's actually adding value to make my life easier, and the financial literacy aspects. But if I sort of combine the two questions now, what adds value? Well, if I don't care about open banking, all I want to know is that I have found a service that's going to make my life better, or is going to educate me or help me. And I need to know it's from a trustworthy source, and I need to know that my data is secure, and that this isn't two guys in their garage who've built a company, that they're regulated to some extent, that I can trust them. And then it's the services. And to give you that sort of that leap of what's possible, one of my favorite use cases is actually account monitoring. And we've seen it in the UK, where there are different services that make use of that. So, and the absolute one that I would love to see more here is the idea of helping the financially vulnerable. So if you've got a family relative member who's in a care home, you want to monitor their accounts to make sure they haven't been coerced into doing something silly with their money, buying something, sending it to the wrong people, something like that. They'll monitor your account. Well, that's great for people in that situation, but that account monitoring for small business, monitor my account. And if you see a transaction come in that's going to put me into an overdraft position where I'm going to get hit with fees, they will send money into your account to avoid the fees. Now, our fee structure is not that bad, but you can still see a small business saying, yeah, that'd be useful to me. Or from a consumer standpoint, watch my account. And if you realize that, hey, I've saved $150 because I didn't have all my coffee this month, recommend to me, put it into my TFSA, make an extra payment on my mortgage, like tell me what to do with it. Not only show me the graph and say, here's what the situation is, it's that insight of, and now here's the actions you can take. And this is what always brings me back to the read is not enough. Help me take that action. Today, we can tell you, to some extent, we'll show you and we'll tell you, and then you're on your own to take action. And that's where we're falling down.
And Mahima, I'm going to say, and I'd like you to help me out with this, that there's likely demand for that. I think a lot of people would appreciate something like that, no question.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the crux of this, right? Look, like the average customer doesn't care about open banking. They don't know what open banking is. It's too complicated. It's confusing. They're not going to invest time in it. It's the responsibility of banks like ours, all banks, fintechs, the FI community to create use cases based on those stated and unstated needs of customers to actually drive value out of this. To your point, like one of the things that EQ Bank is looking at is how do we help our customers manage their credit cards? And these are not credit cards that are with EQ Bank, but a very common financial instrument where at least our customers tend to have more than one credit card. And they go through these, or at least some of them go through these rituals where they're checking their transactions to make sure they haven't been double charged or wrongly charged or charged more than what they should have been charged, but they're doing it all manually, and it's a ritual that they're going through. If we could get the data through open banking, and we're trying to do this, quite frankly, through screen scraping at the moment, to automate that and give them alerts and triggers of this happening, it can give them that peace of mind, save them the energy of doing it, and help them optimize their actual cash flow so that they're not paying off their credit cards early in the fear of getting dinged with an interest rate. So I guess there's a ton, at least our customers are saying there's a ton of demand for these solutions. They have to be created with obviously the needs and the customer behavior in mind. But quite frankly, without open banking, it's going to be very hard for us to get to these solutions, even if we are trying to do screen scraping. And I appreciate what Marc said with like the Borrowells of the world and some of the other fintechs who have kind of leapt forward and tried to get there pre-open banking. But there is a ton of complexity that comes with that. You have the big banks that are telling consumers that they are violating their terms and conditions by using a screen scraper. It is in fact true. They are violating their terms and conditions, but it's the only way to get to that end outcome. And then as a bank or an FI in between in that process, there is like concern with us being responsible for our customer now negating their terms and conditions with another FI. So I guess I'm saying like totally appreciate that this is the only way we can get there right now, but it does come with a ton of other complexity that needs to be managed, and there are some trade-offs. And so ideally, open banking with a robust API framework allows us to get to these end outcomes without kind of the reality that we're stuck in right now.
Thank you. Marc, any thoughts on that?
No, I guess it summed it up. It's like I've always been under the belief that the biggest fear driving open banking is that FIs fear other FIs taking their business, or sort of that there would be, there's just no level of like, oh, well, if I'm paying, it would be simple enough to build an app, connect your bank account. You're paying $72 a month in bank fees. Go to this bank and pay $5. Like that's the boogeyman of this conversation, and it's the reality. But kind of take it back. PC Financials existed forever. You can pay no banking fees there, but like it's just one of those things. Like that's the boogeyman of all this, is that we're now, if you do that, the floodgates will open, and then the prices will start to drop.
Thank you, Marc. Mahima, you mentioned something that's a really nice segue too, and we're talking about regulatory, and I want to get into a bit of government right now and what they're trying to do and where they're setting the bar, so to speak. You mentioned screen scraping, and I know it's of interest, and they want to reduce it, and it seems like it's something that a lot of people can get behind, so to speak. Is this essentially the bar for where government is going to move forward with the new open banking lead? I mean, is this going to be the engine or the heart of regulatory framework moving forward?
I mean, it does seem to be a key focus in what's coming out. I think it's misguided. As mentioned before, there's far too much focus on the security or the lack of security as it relates to screen scraping. It has to be based on increasing innovation and competition in Canada by enabling data access and mobility, and ideally payment initiation. But you're right. Like I think so much of the discussion is being focused on moving away from screen scraping. If you look at the experience in the UK, though, they moved to open banking and they still are very reliant on screen scraping. That is very likely to be the environment in Canada, because my guess is again, to Marc's point, the incumbents are not necessarily going to make the data that we want available. It's probably going to be quite a narrow set to start with, and so you won't really get that innovation without this joint functionality of open banking and screen scraping. If like phase one of open banking looks like it should, then there will be widespread data access, and we won't need screen scraping, and it will get to the end outcome that the regulators are looking for. And the innovation is just, my gut is telling me that it's not going to happen. It's going to be a narrow set of open banking data, and so we will be reliant on screen scraping for a while. And I think the benefits outweigh the costs.
Yeah, and David, to that point, do we think that government is really trying to set a safe frame here versus a more riskier frame and driving maybe some value for consumers here? Is there political equity for government to take a bolder step here?
Well, there's equity involved for sure. There's equity for somebody if someone takes a bold step. I'm not sure because, I mean, to be honest, we now have our lead, but we don't know what the guardrails are going to look like or the framework. We have the recommendations from the advisory committee. And
Right.
to build on Mahima's point, I actually quite liked the scope. We're broader in scope in a lot of ways than a number of other countries. It's everything accessible by online banking. It's going to include, RSPs and TFSAs, checking, savings, mortgages, loans, and credit cards. So that's pretty broad. I think, as you said, the data that we may need to see the financial world turn into what happened in the travel industry with, the Expedias and Travelocities and Travagos, the aggregators of aggregators. We will get that, and we're seeing it now to a lesser extent, but it will grow to be able to do price comparisons and product comparisons. Who's got the highest interest rate checking account? Who's got the lowest fee credit card? That stuff exists. But if we call that bank product information, I don't know if the banks are willing to open that up and let it make it available. They all have ABM locators and branch locators, but that too should be part of the game through APIs. I should be able to find the nearest ABM of any type, and there's companies that do that. So if you start to take all those pieces, the potential's there if we can just sort of push things along. And if it's just a guardrail, then the industry drives it, which will be dominated by the big banks, and the rest will either follow along or there'll be forks in the road and slight splinter groups, as it were. And until we get a greater push, then we just trundle along with whoever's following Big Brother or the Big Brothers. Let's call it that. Whereas in other countries, here it is, you have to do this. So I think we've got the scope. I'd like to see more push to drive us forward at a faster pace and in a direction that is more inclusive of the things that add value. If we go the other way, like the US, where it's market driven, it's completely about who's going to make money in any given use case or situation, and who knows where that takes us.
So I think we have perhaps an idea of who's really framing the agenda here. And Marc, I'd like to get to you on this. And we've touched a bit on it about what we can learn from other countries, but I'd like to dig a little deeper if we could. I mean, you mentioned Brazil before. The UK and Australia are also other countries. If you could share some examples out there that would further the argument that yes, other people are doing it and they can move forward, and there are some models out there for Canada.
Yeah, like I think it's the way I've always said it. It's very simple. If you're going to move money instantly, you should adjust for risk. Like it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And that's the lane I operate in. It's like EFTs as it is today in Canada are the clunkiest thing. You couldn't imagine what I think 94 reasons they could fail and days delays. Like even in my industry alone, and I'm sure others can tell me. Like I said again, in the law industry, closing homes, everyone's got a story of like, oh, I'm waiting on payment. But then you go to a country like Brazil, who's built a QR code system with open banking, and I think they had 50 companies pop up overnight that just increased innovation at a scale unheard of prior to. It's a new gold rush, right? And I think UK they stumbled, but they were the first out of the block, and Australia themselves kind of took a bit of a lead, and they're and increased innovation. Like even Zero themselves, like there's a reason why Zero is used by almost everyone in, let's call it Oceania, because they had the first access to it, and it created so much value. And like we said, the one thing I can't buy is time, and I think every small business probably agrees with that. And I think that's, that's, if you said, listen, you can tie all your finances, get all your data, figure it all out, great. And that's the value prop for a company like Zero.
Right.
In Brazil, it's basically saying, hey, we have underbanked people. This is a way to get them off of insanely high interest rate, like prepaid cards, or because they have a whole different system where you're kind of like where you would pay for something in installments through bank. And that's almost all gone overnight. And people now were able to get financial services quickly and affordably. And with Canada, I think it's going to be different because our whole ecosystem is different. But as far as I'm concerned, you want to move funds instantly, just for risk, and then we can all sleep easy at night because that's what we want.
Fair enough. David, any thoughts on that?
Well, I keep looking at what's going on in other countries. We're always a bit unique, particularly with open banking. It's a little bit of a tougher, I'll call it a tougher sell, because we've had debit, which looks instantaneous to all of us. We've had it for many years, and even with e-transfer, which looks instantaneous. We've had these for so long that we're looking at trying to introduce something that looks and feels a lot like those two things. So again, consumers are going to say, okay, well, what's new? But for businesses, and here's the payment geek in all of us in the banks and payments, it's that settlement piece. That changes a company if instead of receiving money for all of today's purchases, receiving that money tomorrow, if you get it within seconds, hell, even in an hour, that changes your business. I mean, just your cash flows and everything you can do. So that's what we're looking for is let's get those services in place. Let's have that framework that will allow that speed of use. I mean, as Marc said, EFTs, we could turn them into a much better vehicle, but they're closed access. It's not something that every company can do. You've got to initiate or give an instruction to your bank to execute one of these, and you've got to do it well in advance. Whereas when we get to real-time payments, as a small company, I can wait till Friday morning at 9:30 to ensure I've got the cash flow and then send out my payroll. I don't have to send an instruction by Excel spreadsheet 2 weeks in advance. So, I mean, there's all these different things. Now, it's not quite open banking, but open banking allows those instructions to be injected into the system from one service provider to tell that bank to move money to that bank or to this company. And it's that fulsome ecosystem is what we're looking for to be able to do those things.
Right. That's a good point on receivables. And Mahima, I'd like to ask you to expand too, because small businesses and access to liquidity as well could be greatly improved as well.
I mean, I would actually take a different angle and say, like, one of the most important things the government can do is to actually create demand for open banking or payments modernization.
Yeah.
Because right now, from a politician's perspective, I feel like there is this like looming potential risk of security or affecting the stability of the financial markets in Canada, which have always been quite a source of pride for Canada, and understandably so. But you don't have customers kind of demanding the art of the possible. So the payment friction in this country, like both Marc and David have talked about, EFTs is horrendous. Like even as a digital bank provider, in order to manage the fraud realities and NSF realities of EFT, we have to put holds on our accounts, which we know are so painful. We want to remove them, but there's nothing that allows us to do that in the Canadian landscape. But if we could educate, or if the government could educate the consumer base and create demand for open banking on what the art of the possible is, like real-time payments with this fraud check through open banking that Marc referenced, or data insights or personalized insights, etc., I think we'd be a lot further ahead in having the push for open banking. And to your question on what other countries did, like as far as I understand, the UK or the Financial Conduct Authority actually put aside a budget specifically for educating consumers on the benefits of open banking and the use cases. And so I feel like we need something similar in Canada to create that swell of demand. And I mean, in the interim, all of us kind of have a shared responsibility to do what we can to raise that awareness or to advocate on behalf of the consumer um, to the regulators and the policy decision makers. But I do feel like in as much effort as we're putting in, we're still like we've got a huge hill to climb, and we're not really there.
In terms of awareness, of course, and
in terms of awareness and creating demand, and like I feel like too much of this discussion is between the FIs and really the big FIs. And there's a symbiotic relationship between the big FIs and the government, so I can understand why it's happening. But it's so insular that if there was other voices at the table that were really advocating for the customer and competition and innovation, I think we'd be further along.
Okay, David, what's it going to take in order to, I guess, compete and deliver on innovation?
Well, I mean, open banking can be sort of the great equalizer. Once we've set the rules as to who's allowed to participate or how, what hurdles do I have to clear in order to be able to participate? There is absolutely no reason that fintechs should have to go through a bank as a partner or a sponsor. It's not the card world. We shouldn't be doing bank sponsorship as we do old bin sponsorships. But it's tell me how I can participate. What do I have to do to get licensed or registered or certified? And then the due diligence is done, and then they come. As soon as you start to bring that innovation as to a new way to approach things, I mean, there is no one killer app. There's a lot of different things that could add value. One of the ones we talk about probably quite a lot in the banking circles is credit risk adjudication. We've had companies for years say, "Oh, I can do it faster. I've got this fancy new adjudication engine. I can adjudicate you very quickly within minutes, and I can get you the money quickly." And that's true. But that's just the starting point. So to be innovative, I've got to bring in more information. I've got to bring in education. I've got to bring up the level of literacy. I've got to raise the level of trust, and I've got to have these lots of services that will make use of the functional aspects of open banking to deliver value. And again, I know I harp on it. I keep coming back to the services. Think first about what your customer wants and needs, and then what do we need to deliver that? And the innovation comes from, I should be able to get new services out there. I should be able to get more information. I should be able to give you more advice. And in doing all of this, hopefully we're using newer and better technologies. Again, not easy for, the institutions that have the legacy quagmire and the technical debt, but that's part of it. And when we get a combination of those, hopefully we can get to lower pricing and costs of this entire infrastructure. But I mean, there will be a push and pull as those who can move faster do, and those who can't struggle to catch up. But eventually they will get there. But do we wait for everyone to give them a level playing field, or do we open the door and say, have at it and keep the consumer or the customer in mind?
Good question. Marc, what do you think?
Well, I think the perfect payment platform exists today. I'm not talking about Zoom right now, though. But the reality is, open banking comes, EFTs used to be able to adjudicate the risk. I have to give credit to Visa and Visa Direct in particular, because as far as I'm concerned, that is the gold standard of a payment platform. Not only does funds move instantly, but you can shift liability, which is one thing that we're all trying to do. If we're going to make it secure, how can you do that? And that is a collaboration between Visa and the banks, because the how 3 secure works. But that is one of the things that I think has pushed innovation, and it kind of gets lost because it's not well distributed. We do have a well distributed product in Canada called Interact. But the problem is that, again, sort of like EFT, it has its goods and then its bads. And I really think, anyway, it's going to come down to people, like I said. It's going to come down to either businesses starting to say, I can solve a problem that you're going to want to buy, and it's just going to be open banking and payments are the byproduct of that, or that they have to take on the screen scraping or an advanced solution. But this is, I think, even though we don't want to be market demand, it is market demand. Like, there's a reason why these companies exist. People want it, and they want it for the betterment of their financial literacy, their financial future, or even for their business loans, like Clearco does. Like all that is just ties in, and it's all helping the economy by making things quicker, safer, and faster.
Do we think Ottawa's ready for this? Wants this? I just don't see it. I mean, what is it going to take to get their attention, Marc?
It's not.
Yeah.
I've been to every payment conference since the beginning. Nothing changes. Let's just be honest. Like, nothing is changing unless companies do things, right? And why would Ottawa want to say, hey, I'm going to have to either give committee money to help form the banks or give some sort of incentive for the banks to do this? No, we have a housing issue. Inflation's going up. We're probably entering a recession, as everyone's saying. That's the least, like, every political consultant would be like, what are you doing? And even I don't want that money to happen there. I really think there should be clear rules written about so that anyone who is providing aggregation is not turning around and selling it on a blacklist somewhere. But if you put in something clear there, that would make people rest easy. Because you can't say, oh, screen scraping's bad, but then you go around and use Google. They're the biggest screen scraper of them all. So we find ourselves in this weird situation where I don't think Ottawa wants to get involved because it's a no-win, but I really do think that people want a solution, and we're sort of in the prisoner's dilemma. And if you've worked for me, you've heard that term a million times.
Interesting metaphor. Mahima, your thoughts?
Absolutely. Like, I don't think Ottawa is necessarily ready. I don't think this is on their radar. I think they have, unfortunately, bigger fish to fry. There's probably a better term there, but there's a lot on the policy plate, and I don't think open banking is at the forefront. I think ideally, if we could get attention on an accreditation model so that all fintechs and banks, et cetera, can participate, like, you want an open model that allows participation with accreditation and a liability model, then the foundational pieces are there for the innovative fintechs, banks, et cetera, to produce the use cases that customers are demanding. So that's where ideally I'd like to see Ottawa focus, is on those two elements where you need government involvement, and then let market demand and the innovative entities in this country take over from there.
David?
Well, as you said earlier, I mean, there's government and there's politics.
Right.
So in order for us to move forward with this, I mean, it's nice that we've been getting, well, let's call it lip service since 2018 about open banking, and lots of studies and consultations. That's all great, but policy and new laws and legislation take a long time to get enacted. And then you've got the political side of, well, who's in charge? Who's got needs? Can we pass it? Can we get it through? So I mean, let's leave that part of it to the people that write laws and know how to get them passed. In the meantime, we can't wait for those. So let's start moving forward with the build, and let's just have some vision, go down a road, come back later and say, no, stay inside this box or use these guardrails. But if we wait to be told what we're allowed to do, we'll never get there. We've got to push forward and start pushing the boundaries, and they will tell us, no, come back inside the fence. And that's where we need some vision.
Yeah. So what's our great hope then for the new open banking lead, or czar, if you want to call him? What is our great hope for this for the next? I think, is it 24-month runway that's been laid out? It's like
18, I think, right?
18, even tighter. So get it done. So what are we hoping? What are we looking for out of this?
I mean, I think one big advantage is, like, we're late to this game, right? Like, it's already been done around the world, so it's not like we have to invent from scratch. I think Abraham in that role is in a good position to kind of leverage what's been done in other countries and hopefully ride, not to say it's not going to be a ton of work. Not saying that, but I think that's the big hope, is that because we are playing catch up here, it gives us momentum, and it allows us to get there faster, and we can point to success stories around the world to get us there.
And there's a balancing act of the idea of moving forward. It could lead to a lot of, let's call it, bilateral agreements to get things done. But if we have too many of those, then you've got to unwind those when we actually get to our framework. So it's how do we push things forward and make it happen, but at least between interested parties, without tying ourselves in or locking ourselves in when, you know, we finally get to that more open state.
I mean, David, it's a really good point, and we've tried to do it, quite frankly, like EQ or Equitable Bank is like trying to participate in these forums, but until you have a big bank participant, they're quite useless, right? Like we've tried to bring together the fintech community and the smaller banks, and like the whole thing ends up dissolving because you've got 90% plus market share sitting in the big banks, and unless they're going to participate, it's such a fringe effort.
Marc?
No, I really don't have.
Yeah, that's fine.
Expectations on it. Well, I build software, right? Like it's like if tomorrow open banking descends from the heavens, my software's better, right? And if it doesn't, it doesn't. You know, maybe I'm a pessimist. I just, you know, it's 15 years in payments, and how many times have we heard all these things about all these, and it just doesn't happen. You know, EFT, I look at it, you know, they added an extra file window. Great. That's the level of my expectation. But I want this person to succeed. They have every country's failures in front of them.
Right.
Then we have a real systematic problem.
Yeah. We can't focus on just one. There are things to learn from both, you know, the ups and downs, successes and failures in every single implementation of open banking around the world. You know, Australia, they very much took the consumer rights, right, the data rights, and then applied it to banking. In Europe and then UK advanced it even further it's about this. So, I mean, let's look at all these models and, you know, I like the Brazilian models you keep referring to, Marc. It's they made some decisions and they just went, right? Just
fantastic.
You've got to go.
It's amazing. I've seen it in action. I couldn't. As far as I'm considered, it's the gold standard. But let's hope.
I think it's like, Marc, to your point, and David as well. Like, I think it's really interesting because payments, even though it's not really part of phase one, is where we can make the most impact. Like, I think somebody asked a question around what's the most impactful use case. I think it's payments, like the speed. And I know it's not part of the scope, so it's really unfortunate. But like T+1, T+2 turnaround times on basic payments in this country is unacceptable. And we need to be driving to I don't know, payments in this century. And it is that data piece that comes with payments that will allow us to get there.
Good point. Okay, we're running up against the clock here. We've got a little bit of time left. I want to ask you just one rapid fire round in terms of like 30 to 60 seconds, if you could, maybe on the 30-second side. Quickly, what do we expect or hope in the next 12 to 24 months in this for open banking here? What are our hopes and expectations, and what's your crystal ball telling you? Go ahead, Mahima.
I would love to see a framework agreed upon, whether that's FDX or FData, to give us the framework to start building so we're not rebuilding. And as I mentioned, I think we need an accreditation model and liability model defined by the regulator.
David.
Yeah, I'll build on that. Tell us what standard to use for data security. Tell us what standard to use for exchange of data. Tell us exactly what where the liability is when we hand off data, and then I want the payment initiation. I think data mobility is definitely part of it, but it's that take action step. That's where I'll see know we're actually adding value to anybody.
Marc.
Well, I want to climb the highest mountain in Canadian fintech. I want to beat instant payments before anyone does, and I think that we have. But for that to be successful, I need there to be a consistent and clear framework for open banking. I don't have to continually adjust to the rules, and I've given up on setting expectations. I wish everyone who is involved with touching the metal on a daily basis the best, and I believe they have their best intentions in place. But as it stands right now, Canada as an economy will suffer if this is not addressed in the next 6 months. We're already staring down a bad recession, housing issues, and it will be fintechs who offer differing solutions who will help solve these problems.
Marc, thank you for that. And it's a strong appeal and a message to government to get its act together, I guess, and start moving forward. and providing guidance for the industry. For Mahima Potter, David Hooper, and Marc Milewski, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us on this session for Open Banking. All the best. We look forward to chatting soon. And there it is. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everybody.